And tonight we're going to be looking at a man by the name of Joseph. And so in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22, the writer says, by faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. When I first got saved, it was within the first 3 weeks, no more than that. I was reading as I was taught through the New Testament. I had gotten to the book of Hebrews, and I had read chapter 11, and it impacted me so much that I took my Bible, went across the street to a neighbor's house. It was the same neighbor that the woman that I went to speak to, her son was a friend of mine, had been for many years. And it was the same house that I was going to go to on December 27th to get high. It was the same house. And now I'm a Christian, so I'm reading through the Bible, and I get to Hebrews, and I still remember picking up this chapter and reading chapter 11 to, her name was Mrs. Nava. Spoke to Mrs. Nava and read it. She and her daughter didn't have a clue what I was reading, but I was sure blessed. And so over the years, I've obviously read and taught through the New Testament more than once, and Hebrews obviously more than once. And that's why I thought, this time as we go through Hebrews, I want to spend a little more time developing the characters. And so what we're going to look at is Joseph. And so Joseph's story, as we're going to pick it up, begins for us in chapter 37 of Genesis. So let's open our Bibles all the way back to the first book, Genesis. And we're going to take a journey from chapter 37 to chapter 50. Now, if you believe in dead people coming to life, you can believe I'll go through these chapters. And I have to tell you, it's going to be obviously summarization. There are going to be chapters I don't even touch. You'll see that in a moment. But I want you to get a better view of who Joseph is and why he's being placed here in the hall of faith. And so in Genesis 37, some background information, then we'll look at it. Joseph is the 11th son who was born to Jacob and Rachel. And as you look at this man in Scripture, he's a tremendous man of God. And Christian theologians recognize him as what is called a type of Jesus Christ. How is that? Why would people say he's a type of Christ in the Old Testament? Well, he made superior claims. You'll see that. He was rejected by his brothers, hated without a cause, was a victim of a conspiracy, was betrayed and was sold, but later was exalted. And we're going to be seeing that, even though we're only going to touch on a few things. I can't take you through all of those chapters in depth at all. But we will be looking at certain chapters. I'll be reading to you like I did last time we were together. And other chapters, I might make a mention and we'll just move on. You'll see that. And we will, to the best of my ability, conclude our study tonight. So beginning here in chapter 37 in Genesis at verse 1, I'll begin reading. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father had been a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. The lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he also made him a tunic, a cloak, or a coat of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. And so Joseph is there in a place, as it's saying to us in verse 2, he's in a place learning how to take care of sheep. That's what he's doing. And he's being taught by his older brothers. He's with four of them. He's with one by the name of Dan, another named Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And they did something, and it's unnamed. It doesn't say what they did here in verse 2. It simply says that Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. So he ratted them out for something, and that didn't sit well with them. You see, as a 17-year-old man, he had been given authority in the family. And the fact that he used the authority to actually do something that was proper, which was to report them for something that they had done that wasn't right, well, it caused them to hate him even more. It says in verses 3 and 4 that his father had loved him the most, and it was obvious to all of them. Now, Jacob loved him more because of two reasons at least. Because he was what is called the son of his old age. One of the commentators in Scripture says that he was, Jacob, around 91 years old when this boy was born to him. 91 years old. I don't even want to think about that. And another reason that he loved him so much is that he was the son of Rachel. And Rachel was Jacob's beloved wife. He loved Rachel. And so what we have here really, when it states and tells us here that Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, we get another example of what has been called sibling rivalry. This seems to be a family trait. Because when you read concerning Abraham, Abraham loved and preferred Isaac. Or then you look at Isaac, and Isaac preferred Esau. When you look at Jacob, Jacob prefers Joseph. And so you have sibling rivalry that seems to be endemic within the family. And how does he show this favoritism? Well, he gave him a coat of many colors. And that's an interesting phrase. When it says he gave him a coat of many colors, it speaks of various colored striped cloths. Colors refers to the length of the sleeves. And the sleeves would have been symbolic of authority. He wasn't a worker in the field. So this coat is richly embroidered, and it was worn by those of upper ranks. And so the obvious favoritism provokes envy and jealousy in his brothers. So he reports them. And his reporting them, as well as Jacob's obvious preference, stirred up the hatred that his brothers already had against him. And so there's already hatred. Verse 5, Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers. They hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I've dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf rose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Shall you indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. He dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I've dreamed another dream. You'd think he'd learned the first time. He didn't. I've dreamed another dream, he says. This time, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. He told it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come and bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So he interpreted it properly. He saw what he was saying, that he was going to have authority in the family. So the father makes it very clear. Now what we have here is a picture of his mother and father, his brothers doing homage to him. He speaks of his brother's sheaves. These are grains that were tied together, and they're all bowing before his sheaf. And then you have the sun, moon, and the 11 stars bowing before him. That's a picture of the nation of Israel when you look at the book of Revelation in chapter 12, verse 1. And so he recognizes it. Jacob recognizes what he's saying here. But his brothers envy him. His father, on the other hand, takes it to heart and begins to ponder the meaning. The result is obvious greater envy and greater anger and greater hatred. In Proverbs 27:4, you might want to remember this one. Wrath is cruel, anger a torrent. Who's able to stand before jealousy? And so they were so upset and all because he had made it very clear he's going to rule. Well, his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I'll send you to them. So he said to him, here I am. He said to him, please go and see if it's well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. And so they're out there feeding his father's flock. Joseph is sent to check on their condition. Verse 15, a certain man found him. There he was, wandering in the field. The man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? He said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they're feeding their flocks. The man said, they have departed from here. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. And so what we have here is a type. Let me say this very quickly. It's a picture of Israel wandering in search of water and pasture and finding none. Joseph, Christian commentators have said, is a type or a picture of Jesus who is sent, but he's going to be rejected. Like it says in John 1, verses 10 and 11, he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world didn't recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. And so we're seeing a picture of this as he's going and trying to find his brothers and all. He's unable to find them. But he was told that they had traveled 20 miles northwest. It's a day's journey to Dothan, and that's where he encounters his brothers. Verse 18, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, look, the dreamer's coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. We'll say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben, the Mexican guy, heard it. He said, no, I said, don't do that. But I'm sorry, I'm tired, forgive me. Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So obviously he doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to kill him. He wants to deliver his brothers. They're conspiring to kill him. But Reuben doesn't want him harmed. So he has him thrown into a pit because he's intending to deliver him. Verse 28 says, it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he's our brother and our flesh. His brothers listened. The Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. And so they're stripping him. They take his coat. They cast him in a pit. And notice that they calmly just sit down to eat a meal. Now the Midianites, the Ishmaelites, were relatives. They were both descendants of Abraham, and there they come. And as we read, Judah convinces his brothers to sell Joseph to them, and they sell him into Egypt. Notice verse 28. They sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Now in the book of Acts, in chapter 7, verse 9, Stephen, the first Christian martyr, spoke of this when he said, the patriarchs, becoming envious, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. And we're going to be seeing that in just a moment. Verse 29, Reuben returned to the pit. Indeed, Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. He returned to his brothers and said, the lad's no more. And where shall I go? So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. He sent the tunic of many colors and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? He recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him, without doubt. Joseph is torn to pieces. And Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and he mourned for his son many days. All his sons and his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. The Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. And so, they had taken his coat, they dipped it in blood, but Jacob recognized it. It was something that was precious to him, something he recognized as being owned by his son. and it tore him up. It tore him up. He didn't know what to do other than to mourn. They tried to comfort him, it says in verse 35, but his heart was broken. Notice how he says, I'll go down to my grave, mourning my son. And what they ended up doing is they sold him in Egypt to a man named Potiphar. He was an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. Now, he was an officer. Let me give you a couple thoughts about that because I'm going to just keep reading. He was what is called a saris, an officer. He was the captain of the guard. When we read that, you might want to know that captain of the guard, he was an executioner. That's what he was. He wasn't a jailer. He was one who conducted executions. A slaughterer is the literal. So that tells us something of his job and what he was like. And so as this takes place, I'm going to skip chapter 38 because we don't need to really read that. We'll go to chapter 39. Verse 1, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian, and his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus, he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. And Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And so the Lord is blessing Potiphar through the one whom he's blessing, Joseph. And in these verses, we see that Potiphar has absolute trust in Joseph. He's a man being blessed by God. So Potiphar had absolute trust in Joseph, a foreigner, but the one who could not be trusted was Potiphar's wife. Because in verse 7, it says, it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, hey, big boy. She said, lie with me. He refused. And he said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house. He's committed all that he has to my hand. There's no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you're his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And so he's refusing to respond. So it was, she spoke to Joseph day by day. He did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work. None of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. He left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. And so Joseph is a man of honor. This woman approaches him, and he's just a wonderful example of us rejecting sinful temptation, because he leaves. He runs when she approaches him. And so he is a model of rejection of temptation. Now, you need to note that this invitation that she's given to him is constant and it's insistent. It's not just a one time. She's doing it constantly. Come and be with me. Come and be with me. But he's rejecting it consistently. That reminds us of 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18 in the New Testament, when we're commanded, flee from sexual immorality. And so Joseph is a great example of one who is fleeing from that temptation. And he's an example to all who would live godly lives in Christ Jesus. And so, verse 13, so it was when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, because she had grabbed him, and he ran out, and she held on to the garment and fled outside. She called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. he came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. It happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home, and she spoke to him with words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. And so what happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. And so it was, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, his anger was aroused. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in the prison. So she creates a false report because she was rejected. She accuses Joseph, as you read, before the men of the house as well as to her husband. And so Potiphar has Joseph cast into prison where the political prisoners are housed. But, verse 21, the Lord was with Joseph, showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So you continually are seeing that the Lord is doing works in his, no matter what he's going through, he's doing works in his life. It reminds us of Romans 8:28, where it says, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And so there he is in a place that he wouldn't be, but he's in a place where God is blessing, and he's assigned responsibility. Now, some people would ask a question, is this really fair? I mean, is that the way a person who loves God, flees from temptation, is honorable, who has been unjustly treated? Is that fair for him? But the answer is, this is how God is refining him. And this is how God is purifying him. Even though he's a godly young man, God is strengthening him. It reminds me of Romans 5:3-5, where Paul said, we also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character. And character, hope. Hope does not disappoint us because God has poured out his love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, whom he has given to us. So even though he's going through this unfair treatment, God is working in him. Whatever he is doing, the Lord is making it to prosper. So in chapter 40, it came to pass, after these things, that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended the Lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker, so he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, so they were in custody for a while. So Joseph is given the responsibility to oversee these two high Egyptian officials in Pharaoh's court. So as he's there and he's getting to know them and he's got leadership, verse 5, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in prison, had a dream. Both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. And Joseph came in to them in the morning, looked at them, and saw they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his Lord's house, saying, why do you look so sad today? They said to him, we each had a dream. There's no interpreter of it. So Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. Then the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, behold, in my dream a vine was before me. In the vine there were 3 branches. It was as though it budded, its blossoms shot forth, its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner when you were his butler. But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that should put me into the dungeon. The chief baker saw that the interpretation was good. He said to Joseph, I also was in my dream, and there were 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh. The birds ate them out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. Thank you very much. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief butler to his butlership again. He placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. A couple of thoughts, and then we'll move in to go further. The butler was in charge of the wine. The baker is in charge of the bread. And so what you have here is a picture. It's a type. They're having a dream. And then you look into the New Testament, what does bread and wine represent? And what do the words remember me remind you of? So it's a picture of this one who is going to die. And so it's kind of a prophetic picture, if you will, that he's interpreting that finds a fulfillment later on in the New Testament. Now, Joseph asked the dream, but notice with me that it's God who gave the interpretation. In the book of Job 33, verses 15 through 17, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men while they slumber on their beds, he opens the ears of men and terrifies them with warnings, that he may turn man aside from his deed and conceal pride from man. So it's God, even as he said, it's the Lord who gives the interpretation. It's God who gives a revelation. Joseph doesn't take responsibility for it. Now, he had said in verse 14 to the butler, remember me when it's well with you. But verse 23 says he did not remember Joseph. He actually forgot him. Now, see, we're moving pretty good. Verse 1 in chapter 41, it came to pass at the end of 2 years that Pharaoh had a dream. Behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came out of the river 7 cows, fine looking, fat, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking and fat cows. And Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time. Suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. And Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. It came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. He sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams. There was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. And so he gives a picture here of 7 starving cows who are eating 7 healthy ones, 7 full heads of grain that were eaten by 7 thin heads. As this is taking place in verse 9, the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh saying, I remember my faults today. So he remembers, and he remembers how Joseph had interpreted his dream. And so he calls Joseph in, the Pharaoh calls him in, and Joseph says, this is the interpretation. There will be 7 years of plenty, and there are going to be 7 years of famine. So he interprets this, and he gives advice to Pharaoh to be preparing for the famine. So skipping all the way to verse 33 in this chapter, he says, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. And let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh. Let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be a reserve for the land for 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So he gives counsel. You need to collect all of these things. It's going to be preparing you for the future. And the result, he had asked him, or he told him, put somebody there that you can trust. And you see how everywhere he's going, he's being elevated again. And this time, he's placed in a very powerful position in the court of Pharaoh. According to verse 45, he was brought into a position, and it says, Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, King Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out all over the land of Egypt. So he's made second in command. He's 30 years old now when he's given this tremendous position. Now notice how he was given a new name. The name that I can't pronounce, so I'll pretend I can. Zaphnath-Paneah. It literally is translated, the God speaks. And so he's also given a wife. Her name is Asenath. Now she may have come to faith in God. Now I'm going to develop something with you as an aside. Some wonder, is it wrong for him as a Jew, as a Hebrew man, to marry an Egyptian woman who's the daughter of a priest, the priest of On? Was it wrong for him to marry a pagan? When you read the passage, there are a few things to note. One, it's Pharaoh who gave him the wife. He didn't seek her out. Two, in giving him this woman, Asenath, he was allowing the Egyptians to actually respect the Jew who was married to an Egyptian. He would have received respect for that. Third, it strengthened Joseph's position of power and authority there in Egypt. And finally, this took place before the law of Moses had come into effect, which specifically would have forbidden such a thing. Now, through this woman, his wife, later on you'll see him, she had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. They became ancestors of two of the tribes of Israel. So in chapter 42, we only have 9 more chapters to go. Oh boy. Beginning at verse 1. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? He said, indeed, I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there that we may live and not die. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. The sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now, Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brothers, and he recognized them. And he acted as a stranger to them, and he spoke roughly to them, harshly with roughness. He said, where did you come from? They said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. Joseph recognized his brothers. They didn't recognize him. You see, Joseph looked Egyptian. The Jews had a certain look. The Egyptians had a different look. So Joseph had an Egyptian look. He was dressed as an Egyptian. He was speaking their language. So his brothers, after all these years, didn't recognize him. He didn't look the same. He'd had years of growing and maturing. And also, they don't know who he is. And he's speaking in the Egyptian tongue. And so, excuse me, Joseph recognized them. Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them. He said, you're spies. You've come to see the nakedness of the land. And they said to him, no, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We're honest men. Your servants are not spies. He said, no, you've come to see the nakedness of the land. They said, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today. One is no more. Joseph said to them, it says, I spoke to you, saying you're spies. Well, in this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother. You shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So he put them all together in prison for 3 days. He recognizes them. And there they come. They come before him. They bow before him. And as they're doing that, he's remembering the dreams. And he accuses them, as we just read, of being spies. He imprisons them. Now, in verses 18 through 20, it says, do this and live. I fear God. If you're honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house. You go and carry grain for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. And so he informs them. He says, and this is interesting, these are the kinds of things, if I wasn't just reading and touching on it, that would take some time to develop. The way he's speaking to them, he's telling them that he has an awareness of their God. He's not speaking of the Egyptian gods. When he says this, I fear God, he's connecting with them. And so he's using that as a way to appeal to them. He's assuring them that no harm is going to occur. So, verse 21, they said to one another, we're truly guilty concerning our brother. We saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us. We wouldn't hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. Reuben answered them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy? You wouldn't listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. And they did not know that Joseph understood them. He spoke to them through an interpreter. He turned himself away from them, and he wept. He returned to them again, talked with them, and he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Simeon. Now, why Simeon? Well, the rabbis taught that it was Simeon who was responsible for the slavery of Joseph. So, verse 25, Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. And thus he did for them. And so the rest of the chapter deals with the fact that he had placed this in their sacks and all, replacing the money that they had spent. But as they're on their journey, they find it. They're afraid. And they report it to their father Jacob. And they say, listen, he's going to think we lied to him and ripped him off. And he is telling us that we need to bring Benjamin back. But Jacob is saying, I won't have anything to do with that. I will not let Benjamin return. There's no way. He says in verse 38, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he's left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair and sorrow, with sorrow to the grave. So he says, I'm not about to do that. I will not let him return. Well, chapter 43 tells us the famine is very severe. They had to return to Egypt to get grain. This time they bring Benjamin. He returned to Egypt. Now Joseph had them come to his home. He gave them a supper, and he returned Simeon. But upon seeing his little brother Benjamin, the emotion was too great, and he took some time just to weep alone. So in chapter 44, I'll summarize that too. What he does is he sets a trap. He hides a cup in their luggage, in the luggage of Benjamin, when they're leaving to go back, take the grain back to dad. So he sends his men, and they pursue. They discover the cup and return the brothers to Joseph. And this time, Joseph insists that Benjamin remain there with him. He's not going to go. And so it says in verse 29 of chapter 43, he lifted his eyes, saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? He said, God be gracious to you, my son. His heart yearned for his brother. Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. He went into his chamber and wept there. He washed his face. He came out, restrained himself, and said, serve the bread. So they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves. The Egyptians who ate with them wouldn't eat with them, actually, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that's an abomination to the Egyptians. So they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. What he had done is he put them in birth order. How would he know this, is what they're thinking. And he took the servings to them from before him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry, they were happy with him. And so, chapter 45, verses 1 through 11. I feel like I'm rushing, but Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him. He cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers, who wept aloud. The Egyptians of the house of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers couldn't answer him. They were dismayed in his presence. Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." They came near. He said, "I'm Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years of famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Hurry, go to my father, say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen. You shall be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks, your herds, all that you have. And there I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. There are still 5 years of famine.'" And so his brothers obviously are petrified. Oh my goodness, this is him. He's going to kill us. But Joseph says something we need to remember. He says, "I was sent ahead to preserve lives at the expense, really, of my own, in a sense, in that he was there from 17 to 30. And he says, but I was sent here for that particular reason. So what ultimately he'll say is, you meant this for evil, but God intended it for good. Well, he goes on, and it makes it very clear that he wants his son, he wants his brother rather, to remain with him. And as this is taking place in chapter 45, he could no longer restrain himself. He lets them know, "Make everyone go from me," he says, wept aloud. "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" Brothers couldn't answer him. They're dismayed. "Please come near me." They came near. He said, "I'm Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves again, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life for these 2 years." And so he's making it very, very clear to them that I have come here in order that I might be able to preserve life. Now, he wants everybody, the family, to come and live with them. So chapter 46, and we're getting to the blessing. Verse 1, Israel took his journey with all that he had, that's Jacob, and came to Beersheba, offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night. He said, "Jacob, Jacob." He said, "Here I am. I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt. I will also surely bring you up again. Joseph will put his hand on your eyes." In other words, he'll be there when you die. And so God ministers to him and meets him. In the book of Genesis, by the way, if you take notes, this is the 8th time in Genesis that God ministers to him. And what he's doing, he's setting his mind at ease, and he leaves. And so there's a reunion that takes place that the Lord has brought. And so the Father and the Son, once again, are able to gather together. And we'll conclude now by closing with chapter 50. I'm going to skip all these other chapters. In chapter 50. And we'll close by reading verse 15 following. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespasses of your brothers and their sin. They did evil to you. Now, please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also went and fell down before his face and said, behold, we're your servants. Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day to save many people alive. Now, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. He comforted them, spoke kindly to them. Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household. Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brethren, I'm dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him and put him in a coffin in Egypt. Jacob finally dies. Now, an aside, Joseph's 110. That sounds old, doesn't it? Yeah, of course it does. You know how old his daddy was? 147. Yeah, that old man lived a long time. He died at 147. Now, as he's dying, or died, notice we just read this. The brothers were afraid Joseph would repay them, but he wouldn't. Why? Because you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. This upcoming Sunday, I'll say this briefly, I'll be looking at a portion of Scripture in Colossians. I spent the day today working on it, 2 days actually on it. And I'm going to share a couple things, how it works. But one of the things that I was very impressed with that I'll kind of share with you briefly, and then we'll move to closure. Sometimes when things are in front of us at that moment, we will ask ourselves, how can any good come from this? How can any good come from this? And sometimes, in the natural man, sometimes in the natural way of thinking, we can say that. We can say it to ourselves. I don't see how anything good can come out of something so bad. I was standing here on this platform many years ago before we built the other sanctuary that we have. And I gave a story about a young woman who had, and I've mentioned this before, perhaps some of you will remember this. She had gotten into an argument with her boyfriend. She was a high schooler. And she had gotten into an argument with her boyfriend, and he had taken off his boys will do, and she's not about to let him get away with that. So she got in her car, and she hurried up to follow him. And she was passing cars on Riverside Drive into Ontario. All of us who are from around here know Riverside Drive. She was just moving on Riverside Drive, passing cars, trying to catch her boyfriend who had left a couple minutes before. And she's speeding. And I had been called because as she was speeding, she passed a car and ran to a van with a young mother and 2 babies. She hit it head on, killing the mother and her children, and she died too. So there is horrible, painful tragedy. And I got a call, and they said to me, she didn't go to church, but we can't find anybody who will do a funeral for her. Would you? And I said, of course. So I went to a funeral home in the area, and as I was there, I came walking out, and I have notes prepared for a funeral. I usually have notes prepared so I can just bring some basic things out. But as I'm sharing, they were all high schoolers, all of them. There were a few adults in there, obviously, but they were her classmates, her friends, and this small auditorium was full. And as I'm reading my notes to them, they're just kind of hitting each other and talking as kids can do. And as they did that, I remember just taking my notes and putting them in my Bible and talking to them straight from the heart. And I remember sharing with them. And I shared a few things. Don't even remember what it was that I shared, but I shared with them, every one of you. You're young right now and you don't think about it. You're not aware of it. You may think you're going to live forever. You're not. All of us will one day die. We will stand before a holy and just and righteous God. And if you think you're not going to, you are. And you need to get your life together. I just gave them a full blast gospel message. They got very quiet, which kids do sometimes. These did. So I closed and I said, you need the Lord. You need to receive him. Explain how they could be done. I closed and left. Years later, right here, I was giving a message. I used that illustration. And a woman approaches me and she said, may I share something with you about that story? And I said, of course. She said, the young man who was being chased was my brother. It was his girlfriend who was pursuing him that ran into that van and killed that family and died in the crash. She said, you didn't know this, let me tell you. When you gave the invitation, my brother gave his heart to Jesus Christ, and he's been serving the Lord ever since. What was appearing to be, and it was in so many ways, for evil, God turned it around for good. We never know how he's going to use the circumstances you find yourself in. We have to keep hope and an awareness that God is on the throne. He sees things before they're done. We only see the things in front of us. So by faith, we hold on, waiting. That's why Joseph could say, you intended it for evil. God sent me here for the preservation of many. You did it for evil. I'm not saying you didn't. You did. But God intended it for good. Because man's evil can never overthrow the purposes of God. So when we go through whatever it is we go through, always remember, it isn't over yet. God is still on the throne, and he will see you through. Always remember that.